G'day, legends. I hope that you're having a fantastic day and a fantastic Wednesday, hump day, halfway through the week. Now, as always, we have a lot to go over because we want to add as much perspective and nuance onto things because this is incredibly complex of what is happening. We're going to look at some new drones. Of course, we're going to see what is happening up in the north as there has been significant changes and movements. And we need to talk about the defensive works as well that were meant to be built there. And we'll look at the pushback coming. We'll look at maps in other areas as there has been some maps update in some areas, and we'll compare these across. We need to look at some sabotage, and we need to talk about Patriot systems as well. Now, straight off the bat, here is the map, the capital of Kyiv up here. Now, these red areas have been occupied since 22, the purple since 2014, and this green is areas of which Russia has been at some point and has either withdrawn or pushed back. Now, this is the Kherson offensive, the Kharkiv offensive that we saw from Ukraine in 22, and down here, this green is what we saw on the 2023, then spring, summer, then offensive. And the red we're seeing up here, well, this is Russia's new push that it's having across the border. Now, before we actually have a look at exactly what has been made in here, we also need to talk about Kharkiv borders, then Sumy. Belgrade borders Kursk. And there's a lot of talk that Russia will then open, well over 100 kilometers away, another front line somewhere up here in Sumy. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But as you can see, straight off the bat, there has been some large updates to this map. We knew yesterday that this front had moved out to here, as well as we can see that there is a break-in into Vovchansk. Now, from here, this will slow down because it's moving through then urban area. We know more troops have been deployed here, as well as the problems with the defensive works. But when we're doing the maps here, I want to look at a couple of then geolocations to get a better idea of where this is sitting before we look at some maps of the defensive works then themselves. So this push down here on the western side of what I'm calling the eastern push here, I think I actually got one of them wrong yesterday, but you know what I mean. We have some footage right here. Now, I can't show you this, but it will be on the Telegram. This is a Ukrainian drone spotting for a Ukrainian mortar system. And that has then geolocated. So this is a screenshot of the video, and then this intersection down here, and then put on the map. These are by EJ Shahid. When it was on then yesterday's map, shows way down in here. This is when Deep State did not show that. Of course, today, now Deep State does show this because they can't ignore, well, some things like this at least. So we see down here, this road moving through, that is where is the intersection right here under control, as well as this area here. That's good. It confirms of where we know the map is. Now, more interestingly, we have a Ukrainian drone here dropping multiple ammunitions. Of course, this full video will be then on the Telegram as well on Russian troops and some Russian vehicles here as well. But again, what I'm seeing here is these are smaller, lighter, more reconnaissance vehicle. We haven't seen that crossing of massive armor. Now, of course, this is all over the shop. This video, it's on different places. It's a drone flying around, but the geolocation we get from it, which is geolocated to here, shows out to the east of Vovchansk, then a long way. So let's have a look here. This is where it is geolocated of dropping munitions on Russian troops out here. So if we take where this greenery is on this map, we zoom in. So we're talking out in this direction somewhere. What is a hell of a lot different. Yes, it's shown in gray zone, but this should probably be red around here. And that is a lot more ground. If this does catch up tomorrow, it will be a large chunk, as we are hearing that this has really started to slow down from some people. And there's reason for that, as you know, it comes into more built up areas. And yeah, but what we're going to talk about is there's still no signs that I'm seeing of really heavy armor or thousands of troops actually crossing. What I believe this is, and I've said this from the start, is a large reconnaissance element that is scouting the ground and seeing where the defensive works are, seeing how hard it is to cross, but also in this, feeling out what Ukraine's reaction is actually going to be to a northern crossing. all eyes will be on other areas of the front, not here. What Russia will be doing is pushing some soldiers across here. Right, what does Ukraine do? Does it send everything in this to try and push the guys back? Does it start moving guys from the east? Do they do nothing? How does that then go? That's part of reconnaissance by fire as well. And before Russia commits somewhere else, they'll see this reaction. So if Ukraine doesn't respond here, they might go, stuff it, let's commit here, take soldiers from the south, because we know our defensive works there have been built up, and push here. And if Ukraine really respond here, okay, let's push somewhere else. So I think we could see a withdrawal here as well, just as quickly as we've seen it push across. And New York Times had this today, and I agree with this. Military analysts say Russia is yet to commit large numbers of troops to the offensive, probably deploying just a few thousand soldiers. That would much depend on Moscow's next move. So feeling out what is actually happening here. But what we need to look at is the defensive works. And how did this occur? How did this happen up here? And this is a defensive works failure to have Russian soldiers pushing somewhere in the vicinity of 7 kilometers in here. Basically, from what we've seen walking in, we haven't seen thousands of people killed and tens of tanks to go a hell of a long way in. And we are getting more murmurs off the front line, sorry, something to my eye, of what could have happened here. So this is what we got like on the first day here from these soldiers operating up in here. The first line of fortifications mines simply did not exist. Talking in 2 years, we should have had concrete fortifications. There wasn't even mines. Either is insane theft or deliberate sabotage. We are now losing people, territories, and doing what they did in September. Of acceptance of transfer of fortifications, so taking it on board, were not even then 30% ready. This is incredibly concerning to see that. And then on the first days, we see that the commander here of these forces was then sacked. And we'll speak more about this. We'll look at some maps of these, but we can see more and more of this deep state. We know deep state is in bed with the MOD. Even they are then calling this out. These here are your tank trap pyramids that you see here, your dragon's teeth on this side of the road up in this area. These photos show the outskirts of Lipsy and a gift from Ukrainian taxpayers to the enemy. So this is Holoboki here, and then this is Lipsy down here, of these sitting on the side of the road. What I presume has happened here is a truck has come up, dumped them here, ready to be moved somewhere, and they are sitting exactly like this. And remember, this is from Ukraine sources, the primary source. Let's not draw conclusions. Let them be made by the Commission, which will consider the good faith and contractors who built the defence structures and responsible persons who are supposed to exercise control. And this isn't just Ukrainian taxpayers to the enemy. This is also the Western taxpayers funding for this war and then defence there. People should be very, very annoyed about this. And I'll go further and say, if there is found to be corruption here and people just not doing their job who are liable for this, people shouldn't just lose their jobs. They should be charged with a degree of murder. In my eyes, we all knew for months that Russia may cross here. Russia has been here before 2 years ago. And if you chose to, instead of funding this, lining your own pockets with that money, my eyes, that actually constitutes premeditated. And we can see more of this. This is from a very famous Ukrainian journalist here. On the first day of the onset, the command of the ODU Kharkiv was changed due to some problems. We just spoke about that. Regarding the fortresses, they are built in Kharkiv direction, but to these borders, the enemy did not come. Defensive boundaries are for some reason not tied to tactically advantageous heights. Basic battles continue where the positions are not equipped, and it must be broken now. That's why there is misunderstanding in the troops, and the fortresses are not exactly where they are needed, and why we have to dig into the landings ourselves. In the direction of this Vovchansky down here, the city defense is not prepared. No details yet, but no secret to the enemy. Of course, Russian drones are going to be over here for weeks, months prior. Nothing can be hidden in this war. Regarding the actions of our troops, experienced commanders and units are there, organising defence, defining the front end. Interaction emerges and improves. The chaos on the broad front has not been completely overcome, but the situation is getting better. Russian troops had the initiative on account of a general numerous advantage, pre-planned actions on a broad front. And this was from May 13th, so it is a few days old, but I got sent that across from one of my mates, Ukrainian soldier fighting there, said to have a look specifically at this for these reasons from that journal. So thank you for sending that then across. So things just weren't prepared in this direction, having major areas here that sit on high ground, basically undefended. And that's what we've seen of then this walk in. Let's actually have a look at these works. Now, one thing you'll see is the scope of these works is nowhere near the scope of the works that Russia had down in the south, knowing Ukraine was going to have an offensive. That isn't bias. That is saying it like it bloody is. So this is difficult to see because of how zoomed out it is. But we see Vovchansk here. We can see a few defensive works of which will have fallen because we know the line is behind this. The same then on the western push here, that it is now behind where these works are. There used to be a young lad who did these works really well, and I can't find him. I know he got that much hate online for just geolocating things, but either way, let's try and line some stuff up. So this is looking better at then this Vovchansk area. So let's have a zoom in. We see Vovchansk here. Now, we can see some of this yellow here, and these defensive works were either there, non-existent, we don't know, but have basically been walked over into then this front. Although sitting behind Vovchansk a fair way back, we do then see these defensive works are built up, but still fairly thin. This is nowhere near like the multi-layered lines we see down Surovikin. It'll be interesting to see how this then holds up. Maybe Russia will not want to push to here. We see this defensive work sits somewhere down in here, let's say 20 kilometers. We take what Putin has said about this buffer zone. Maybe they are just looking to push in maybe 10 kilometers and hold that, create a buffer zone, but also that will have the other effect of then stretching Ukraine more thin because they're going to need to man all of this because there's a threat on, of course, then Kharkiv. Now, let's have a look on this western side in here around Holoboki as well. So we see just here, now this is hard to line up, but we have this Lukyatsky here as well. So these areas in here have definitely then fallen. Some of these defensive works in here. Again, down into Kharkiv, there's then not that much pushing. Yes, some in Vesely, but still. Now, there may be a lot more than that. It is very, very difficult to get an idea of these. I'm using really dodgy sources to find these, but still, it's still important to talk about it. And the movements made here, and we will go over the maps in a second. Now, a lot of cheering has been coming out for this footage. Now, this shows Kraken Special Forces here from Ukraine under then artillery attack up in this Kharkiv area. Now, the first thing that came to mind was a friend of mine who's very well connected and on the tools doing shit over there. And I can't say again, every time I take something from this guy, I say after the war, it'd be very interesting for him to come on and be like, hey, this is what I was doing. This is what my boy's doing, blah, blah, blah. But this was what he talked about down in Chasov Yar. It's the same thing time and time again. Ukrainian command, when up against the wall, will use their country's senior special force to conduct the role of line infantry in the hopes it'll make a change. So the role here of these defensive works should have been line infantry for Russia to break through. Not wait for then the breakthrough, then send in your special forces. You're saying the same thing. It's not their role from Severodonetsk to Lysychansk and Bakhmut. What should only be used at the strategic level. So out behind the line or in some areas doing bits and pieces. Stuck in a trench, their top snipers are wrongly utilised and unable to act as snipers. Time after time, they aren't learning from their mistakes and making the same ones over and over. It's unforgivable. So I just thought that was interesting to have a talk about and line up there as well. Now, let's have a look over then the maps in this area, and we'll talk about what Budanov has also said. So let's start then on this eastern side over here and have a look at what then Suryak shows. Now, Suryak shows this is where we saw those munitions dropped on those troops and vehicles. So we know that these area up here definitely has Russian troops in it. And this is right out in here. Although Suryak is showing far more eastern movement right out around then this area as well, if not further. And then down on the western side, significantly more, even pushing into then grey zone or green zone here. So see where this kicks up on the border here, as just giving you an idea that it's saying right down, then along here. And I'll show you a topographical map of why this is important in 1 second. So of course, showing more break-in into the center of Vovchansk too. So all in all, showing significantly more movement on than the map. Now, we have a Noel reports one here. I've got my east and west mixed up of this area, but regardless, let's bring up Suryak's. Now, again, not showing the same movement to the west or to the east that then Suryak is showing, but is pushing into the center of Vovchansk and a push out to the east as well. And this movement right down in here, of which he showed yesterday. So he is more similar to then the deep state, but showing more movement out around this area on then the eastern side of that. Now, why is some of this very important in this area? Well, let's have a look then at Vovchansk. So I've put on this map basically what then the Suryak map, sorry, not Suryak, on this map basically what then the deep state is showing. Now, this is Vovchansk, and this is this village down here. So this place, and then Vovchansk. So this is very, very conservative estimates of this area. But we can see that Russia has gained the high ground on the western side and on the eastern and northern side of Vovchansk here. Now, Ukraine does have high ground back from here as well if you zoom out on this, but I just thought I would show you this and why we're seeing important movements regarding this front line area. Now, let's push across here. On this map, no updates today, but we did see yesterday that it did show a Ukrainian pushback in Zeleni here. I'm not sure why this was green instead of blue on this map. Regardless, let's have a look then over it here. Now, this is showing more similar, but still different. Now, it is showing Zeleni here, that Ukraine did have a pushback here as per then the deep state map shows. Again, Holoboki, it's showing more movement out around this reservoir here and more of a push filling out around this town here. But this side is showing a lot more closely than the Vovchansk front is showing at the moment. Now, let's line up Noel reports one here. Now, again, he's showing a lot of movement here. His is more difficult to line up again, but he's showing the Zeleni push here from Ukraine as well here. I believe these are more similar, but both maps showing Russian movement here today. Deep state not showing that, and we can confirm this pushback in Zeleni because all three then are showing it. So again, give it a couple of days. We'll see where things start lining up. Some areas may even take weeks. Suryak, Kharkiv axis Russian army advanced full control over this area here in addition south and west of Holoboki, so right then here, and talked about Ukrainian army on Zeleni as well, but the situation was corrected. So this is maybe why we see this push there yesterday and it's not blue. Maybe Russia was never in here and these maps are correcting what they then showed. So we will see, but it's saying out in this direction here that from Chernihiv, Russian axis took over here and these areas. So Staristia and Baruvka here, and advancing inside Vovchansk. So this is interesting here, and I believe this map is not showing on that movement anywhere near probably what it is. Now, we did have this as well, and it's interesting to see the official wording here. And we see this from both Russia and Ukraine. In the Kharkiv direction, troops repelled, but in separate areas and the areas of here and Vovchansk, due to influence of fire and assault of the enemy to save lives of our soldiers and avoid losses, the units maneuver and move to more favorable positions. More favorable positions means we withdrew because we were getting then overrun. We saw the same thing happen in Avdiivka. We're moving to more favorable positions. Next thing, the line moved somewhere between 10 and 20 kilometers, depending on where you are measuring. In the Pokrovka direction, we repelled 33 attacks in the course of combat, and a result to assault and intense fire from the enemy in some directions. Our units change positions to save soldiers' lives and improve the tactical position. So you can see where I'm going with that, and that is from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. So there are also withdrawals here to positions too. The favourable positions should have been these built-in defensive works, not that if we're measuring back here 20 kilometres back from the border, being generous, that sits somewhere in here. So there is huge issues
with what's going on in here. Now, we have a few things from Budanov. I can't find this clip translated, but a Ukrainian source, the GWA head, Krilo Budanov, said that although Russians had the intention to enter Sumy region, they abandoned the plan due to difficulties in the Kharkiv direction. Now, I don't know. I don't think there's too much. Like, we're seeing Russian losses, yes, but compared to other fronts, we're not seeing that much. I don't know if the difficulties yet here are that high. We could see another opening here, and we see then this on the New York Times. Budanov assessed that Ukrainian forces would be able to shore up their lines and stabilize the front within the next few days, but he expects Russia to launch a new attack further north of Kharkiv in the Sumy direction. So we don't know. I think something may open up in here. The defensive works in here, some are saying, are actually lighter than in Kharkiv as well. So it'd be very interesting to see what happens there. Then the MOD has spoken about this. Russia's newly formed northern grouping of force of attack at Ukraine's Kharkiv region had taken control of several villages. These areas, the border town of Volchansk, is almost certainly an immediate Russian objective and is currently contested. By opening up an additional axis of attack, Russia is almost certainly attempting to divert Ukrainian resources away from other parts of the front line and to threaten Kharkiv, the second largest city in Ukraine. It is unlikely that Russia has built up sufficient combat power to take the city without diverting additional forces into the area. And I would say my take on this is Russia doesn't plan to take Kharkiv. It's this diversion of forces to take other areas, or completely miss Kharkiv and try and siege the city somehow. That said, I don't think this up here is the main axis at all, but I am saying that the planning may become the main axis if there isn't forces moved up to here, or the defensive works and movements is assessed much weaker than I think they were planning for. Then it could become a main axis, and this would be then a problem. Sumy, it's going to be more troops away and reserves, and we know there is manpower shortages, and we're going to speak in length then about this. But let's have a look at the maps as well. So, of course, I've explained where we are on the map. The only change we see, if I come forward a day and turn this on this map, is out from Avdiivka, from Bakhmut. Now, this is then confirmed as well by Syriac maps. We like this. So exact same location showing this movement out from Avdiivka, basically the exact same, but also this break-in further down into Kalinivka, what of course sits right above to the north of Chasiv Yar. Now, this is further as well here from Noel Reports, Avdiivka, showing actually more than both maps, showing that this is closed up in here. Regardless, this grey zone in here, there probably aren't any soldiers. There might not be any Ukrainian or Russian soldiers in here. So effectively it's red, but I guess it is grey if no one's in there, if that then makes sense. That is what I am thinking we are most likely seeing. So we see that update in there. Now, let's come down the Avdiivka front. Again, this map shows nothing today. This map we know, we think trickles in a lot. Now, these moves of which we talked about the other day, we have a push into Ulmansky here as well. Russian army took control over the southern part of Ulmansky. So they have broken in, well, according to Syriac map, up to see where this road joins. I believe this is this road. So a break-in across the Derna here as well, putting pressure on then the Ukrainian troops that are in this block here. They do not want to get caught in here. If Russia is up to, let's say, just here, we're just going off Syriac map, they're either going to have to come out this way or come out this way. For the ISR capability, I wouldn't be too big on this, but again, you're ending up in very open ground up in here, closing that and enveloping the soldiers in here too. We know that is Russia's overall tactic. Now, what I do want to have a look at is Robotyne. Now, down in here, this is the area I say again and again. People go, why is Willie so unsure on things? Because I want to be positive on things because this is important. But we have seen, let's bring up defensive works, that Russia, over the past couple of days, this map has confirmed, has retaken these defensive works. We presume that has been like that for a couple of weeks in this direction. Firstly, that's being cleared up now, out from Verbove. What we don't know is Robotyne, because Syriac will show all of this basically under Russian control of it, 70-80%. This map hasn't moved at all. It's still showing green here, but then grey in the center. Now, WarMapper has then shown this. Now, WarMapper is the most conservative to any gains and is behind. But when he shows something, you can almost be guaranteed that that is correct. So he's I'd say one of the more accurate, but also very slow on movements. That's not meant to be a bad thing. I'm just saying that like it is, but we can see that this is this T intersection right here, that he's saying that Russia has control out here, as well as movement through the majority of Robotyne as of the 9th of May. And he's typically a pro-Ukraine map. So I will say at this point that the majority of Robotyne is under Russian control, reclaiming the rest of these lines here. And this is what I wanted to show. This is the defensive works compared to what we're seeing up in the north. And more people should be critical, and being critical of someone can actually mean that you're in support trying to make things better of what has happened up in the north when there was at least 18 months to prepare for something there. And anyone who didn't think there was a threat of that, well, I don't know what you're smoking. Now, we know Ukraine has been very, very adamant that they need more Patriot systems and reaching out and seeing where they could then get them. Now, when asked about the possibility of Poland transferring a Patriot anti-missile defense system to Ukraine, Duda replied that at the moment they are only receiving the first elements of this system ordered 7 years ago, saying it is difficult today to talk about transferring the Patriot system to Ukraine when in fact we do not yet have this system in Poland completed for the needs of our own defences. So one's definitely not going to be coming from Poland, and we know there's more interceptors coming from areas, but full systems, there are having problems in the entirety of NATO actually fighting those systems, and that concerns me on seeing how far behind the industrial capacity of a war that NATO actually bloody is. Now, in the Volgograd region, we can see as well that a Russian train has then derailed. Now, Ukrainian sources are saying that it was drones that hit it. Russians are saying it was sabotage. Either way, the result, I guess, is the same. And this is something of which I think we've actually seen a little bit less of, and that is, I guess, a bit concerning, is actually partisan actions well behind the line. Remember when Kherson down in here was occupied, we saw shitloads of then partisan actions in and around here. And in the beginning, we saw a lot of partisan actions, and we're actually seeing, I believe, less. We are still definitely seeing some. We're seeing some inside Russia as well, but not the amount that we were seeing. Will there be more? Yes. Will there be things probably as false flags? Absolutely yes, especially when the front line is getting worse and worse for one side throughout this war, and that concerns me. I've spoken about my concern of false flag attacks, because in this war, neither side has said that they're going to give up anything. So one side has to be a victor, therefore one has to be a loser if something's not signed. And I think something will get signed for that situation potentially. But the increased probability then of a false flag attack that won't, have effect on tens or hundreds, maybe millions, I think increases dramatically, and that concerns me. Now, we have seen Ukraine have a lot of success down the Black Sea out from Odessa with their Magura 5 drone boats. We have seen that Russia has moved assets away. It's forced them to move them away, and then has forced them as well to conduct drills to try and counter these drones as well. And those drills have seemed to work, because we have seen that chopper the other day then shooting and taking out some of those drones as well. And what that drone hit was basically just a speedboat as well. So it was one of the least effective attacks. So maybe those drills worked, and I believe we should be doing our same bloody thing. But this video has surfaced from a lot of pages here saying that it's showing then a Russian drone boat. Now, this is just in exercise, then conducting an attack on just a target here, and then a very large explosion. I'm not sure why this one I've got is blurred out, because I've seen ones that then aren't blurred out. The blurring doesn't seem to make much sense, but we can see then a large explosion here. And this is saying Russian public showed a video of testing naval drone, declared a range of 250 Ks and 250 kilograms of explosive. For comparison, the Magura 5 is 800 with 200 kilograms. And I think that would probably, because of course you're going to be talking about fuel and explosives, that if you're going for something short, you can probably down the fuel and up the explosives. I'm sure something along those lines. I've spoken to a few guys about airborne drones who have said that same thing. But of course, Russia doesn't need potentially the amount of range on these drones, as we can see, from somewhere like here, we're talking, 200 kilometers where Russia's ships are. They're going to need a fair bit more range on the Ukrainian drone. So we'll see if those then come into action. Now, yesterday I mentioned how I'm very surprised that Ukraine has not yet announced further mobilization. And I questioned of how desperate actually is this mobilization, because what I'm hearing is it should have been done months or 6 months or 12 months ago. And I guess the scope and the range of how desperate this is could be absolutely huge. From the most optimistic saying that Ukraine has plenty of reserves and soldiers, and this is a bit of a ploy to try and push Russia to send in more troops on the continuation of this attritional war. And this is what we're hearing more and more from Ukraine, that no, we're pulling back in areas to attrit Russian forces down in this meat grinder attritional warfare tactic. Russia's saying the very similar thing. Now, it could be true both ways. Have a look at population and ground being made. I don't know. But that is what the most optimistic would say is Ukraine has plenty of reserves, but pulling them in. Now, the most pessimistic argument would be here that Ukraine doesn't have either the physical or manpower resources to mobilize, say, another 500,000 men. Now, I believe on this spectrum, neither of these to be true. As we have seen, if we take that optimistic example, very, very harsh statements from officials towards men who have fled Ukraine, as well as new laws coming in and disregarding demobilization and rotation of those laws. So I think that tells us a lot. As well, on the other side of this, we have seen many soldiers at the front line making comments about manpower issues. Now, I also believe that Ukraine does have the means to mobilize further. That said, mobilizing, whether we saw it in Russia or in Ukraine, is incredibly unpopular, as we've shown on this channel from Ukrainians themselves. And all of this unpopular was before now, like the Northern Advance and Avdiivka and all of this, that it's going to get even worse because of this push, especially with not having demobilization or rotation. So maybe Ukraine is waiting for a more favourable front line before announcing and conscripting in the tens or hundreds of thousands of men. The number we've had floated before was around 500,000. But this waiting, well, that's a very dangerous game, because the longer you wait, the worse the situation, if you're having manpower problems, is going to become. Therefore, the more unfavourable then the front line may become. This snowball effect, and then that, of course, makes the political situation even worse, and the morale, everything could get worse from that. And remember, there's going to be a significant delay before mobilising, and then that bloke then being on the front line. As Ukraine has stated, their NATO standard 4 weeks of training, which in no realm that my military experience sits in is NATO standard. Typically, the NATO standard for an infantryman sits about 20 to 25 weeks, plus or minus a little bit. I do believe you could cut away a lot of fluff in that and maybe get it down to 10, depending on where someone's starting from. I don't know, physicality has a lot to do with that, but maybe 10 to 12 weeks. That's probably stretching. But regardless, there's going to be a significant delay. And every day of which this isn't then announced and someone isn't then mobilised, it's going to lengthen that by that amount of time, leading then late into the year where we see winter coming. Of course, then the American election and how Russia's movements will then influence that election and people's how they see the outcome of this war going. People are talking about an offensive this year in Ukraine, and I just don't see that they have the manpower or assets to actually conduct that. We saw that there was the artificial shell shortage caused in Ukraine by the US and other nations not having the industrial supply or the political will of some to actually send in those. So we saw that happen, and that still hasn't been completely fixed yet. That'll take weeks or months to actually backfill those, and the manpower is going to be even longer. You can fly a plane into Poland full of shells and truck them to the front line in a couple of days or a couple of weeks. Taking someone from Kiev or Dnipro or whatever, taking them, training them, whether in the West or somewhere in Ukraine for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 10 weeks, and then sending them, lot slower process. You're not going to see the effects of that for a very long time. So there is the question in my mind of, is there a ploy in this to try and get Russia to maybe overextend and get too confident, or is it a morale waiting for the front line to look better? Which I don't know. it's probably somewhere in between. I'm leaning more towards there is massive manpower issues, and yeah, but Ukraine still definitely has some reserves. But as well, I don't think that Ukraine can allow Russia another 12 months. So say Ukraine were to wait 12 months from today to then have an offensive action, because all these defensive works are going to get built up more and more and more. And we saw in the offensive broke through in really one spot, maybe two spots in here, when morale was at its highest, because it had Kherson, Kharkiv when Ukraine took back. The last time Ukraine was winning this war, I'll say, was Kherson, Kharkiv in late 2022. And then these limited pushes in here and the failure of that, this is going to get just more and more reinforced. I don't believe you can give Russia another 12 months. So I don't. This is why I have a pessimistic outlook on this whole thing of this war. And I could give pessimistic on the other side of this too, for what Russia's goals are and asymmetrical warfare and how that would be almost impossible to combat. But that's another video. Legends, look after yourselves. Sorry for this one being long again. I've been blinking all the time. I've got something in my eye. Look after yourselves. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.